She was 4 years old, barefoot in 20 below zero, and when the door opened, she did not cry. She did not speak. She just lifted both arms toward the man with the gun and trusted him with her life. This is what happened next. The bruise on the child's wrist had turned from purple to yellow, the color of an old wound that never had time to heal before a new one took its place. At midnight, beneath the lone candle in a wooden kitchen in Wyoming Territory, the tall man with calloused hands could only look down at her bare blue feet and ask himself a question that would break something inside him. Who had done this to a 4-year-old child? And why had she crawled to his door of all the doors in this frozen country? He had not held a child in his arms for 6 years. He had not spoken to another human being beyond his old hired hand for 6 years. But what this small girl was about to whisper to him within the next hour would force him to stand against the most powerful man in Wyoming. It would bury what was left of the quiet life he had built in the bones of the prairie, because the 4-year-old, standing in 20 below zero, her eyes too dark and too still to cry any more, had walked 5 miles through the snow to find him. And the only reason she had chosen this house, and not any other along the ice-bound road, was the candle in the window. The candle that Wyatt Calloway had kept burning for 6 years for the son he had buried. His name was Wyatt Calloway, and he was 41 years old. For 15 years before this night, he had worn the badge of a United States Marshal across the territories. He had ridden after the Harding gang through 3 states and brought back 4 of them in irons. He had stood across a saloon from a man with a gun in each hand and walked out the only one still breathing. The frontier remembered him. The men who had ridden against him remembered him. And in the quiet hours, when the wind came down off the bighorns, Wyatt remembered them too. He stood 6 feet 4 in his stocking feet, and his shoulders were broad, the way a working man's shoulders are broad, not from any vanity, but from the weight of years. His hair was a dark blonde, gone the color of late autumn grass, cropped short and practical beneath the cream-colored hat he wore from sun-up to sundown. His beard was thicker than most men kept theirs, in town brown going to silver at the chin and along the jawline, and there was a scar that traveled from his right cheekbone up through the brow above it, where a man named Bill Hardin had laid open his face with a broken bottle in 1879. His eyes were the color of cold steel after rain, the eyes of a man who had seen what violence does to a body and had chosen somewhere along the way to pick up the pieces rather than to add to them. He wore a brown leather vest oiled by years of weather and a faded work shirt with the sleeves cut away at the shoulder. His arms were dark from sun and crossed with the small white scars that gather on a man's forearms when he has spent a lifetime around horses and barbed wire and the rough work of land. A wide gun belt sat low on his hips, and the Colt revolver in its holster had been with him since the year he turned 24. His boots were caked with the mud of 1,000 mornings. A red bandana, faded almost to pink, was tied loose at his throat. This was the man who heard the scratching at his door at midnight on a Tuesday in January of 1887. He came down the stairs in the dark the way 15 years, as a marshal had taught him, back to the wall, weight on the balls of his feet, revolver up and steady. He had heard things in his life that other men slept through. The shifting of wind against the wrong direction, the breath of a horse changing in a stall, the particular quality of silence that came before trouble. This was not silence. The scratching came again, a small, tired, repeating sound that did not belong to any animal he could name. He pulled the door open and the cold hit him like a blow to the chest. 20 below and falling. The kind of cold that did not seem like weather. It seemed like a thing alive with a will of its own, looking for a way in. And then he looked down. She was the smallest standing thing he had ever seen. Her dress was a torn gray rag at both shoulders soaked through. Her feet were bare on the snow-covered porch, and they were not the right color. They were white going to blue, the color of things that did not survive Wyoming in January. Her teeth were knocking together so hard he could hear them, but her eyes were absolutely still, dark and huge, and somehow empty of all the things that crying required. She looked up at him. She lifted both arms. It was the most trusting thing Wyatt Calloway had ever been offered in his life, and it hit him somewhere in the chest like a sledgehammer. He holstered the gun. He bent and he picked her up, and she weighed almost nothing. Through the thin fabric of her dress, he could feel each rib beneath his hand. One and another and another, a ladder made of bird bones. She pressed her face into the side of his neck, and her breath came out long and ragged and shuddering the way a small animal's breath comes out when it has finally stopped running. I have you, he said. He did not know why he said it. You are safe now. I have you. She made a sound that was not a word. It was the sound something makes when it has been held in so long that it has lost its shape. Wyatt kicked the door shut behind him and he carried her into the kitchen, where the candle still burned on the table. Silas, he called up the stairs. His voice came out rougher than he meant. Silas, get down here. Footsteps above him, heavy and slow, and then faster as the old man woke enough to hear that something was wrong in the way Wyatt was calling him. Silas Pritchard appeared at the top of the stairs in his long johns suspenders pulled up over a gray undershirt, his white hair standing up in all directions. He was 60 years old and built like a fence post that had survived too many seasons. He took one look at Wyatt and one look at what Wyatt was holding, and his mouth opened slightly. Lord above, Silas said. Get the doctor. Wyatt's voice was flat. Right now. Get Dr. Whitfield. In this weather. Now. Silas. The old man was pulling on his coat before Wyatt finished the word. He grabbed his hat from the peg by the door and was through it and out into the cold, and Wyatt could hear him shouting at the horse in the barn, hear the saddle going on, hear hooves striking ice as he rode out. Then there was only the wind and the candle and the small bundle in Wyatt's arms. He sat in the chair by the stove and he kept her against his chest. He could feel her shaking, less now. That might be the warmth coming back. It might be something worse. He did not let himself think about the something worse. Hey. He kept his voice low, the same flat, quiet tone he had used all his life on horses that had been broken wrong. Hey, can you hear me, little one? She turned her head a fraction. That was a yes. My name is Wyatt. This is my house. You are safe here. She said nothing. What is your name? Nothing. That is all right. You do not have to tell me yet. He looked down at her feet and his jaw set. He had seen frostbite before. He knew what it looked like when it was bad, and he knew what it looked like when it was too late. This was somewhere in between, which meant the next few hours would matter more than anything else. I am going to put your feet in some warm water, he said. Do you understand? I am not going to hurt you. He felt her body go rigid against him. Easy, easy. He kept his voice the same. Nobody is going to hurt you in this house. Nobody touches you without you saying it is all right. Do you hear me? A long pause, then the smallest nod he had ever seen. It cost her something. He could feel it in the way she held herself afterwards, like she had spent a coin she was not sure she had. He got the warm water. He walked slow, telegraphing every motion, and she let him lower her feet into the basin. The moment the warmth touched the skin, she made a sharp sound through her teeth. Pain. That was good. Pain meant the nerves were still alive. I know, he said. I know it hurts. That is it working. That means you are going to be all right. She looked at him then. She had the darkest eyes he had ever seen on a child. Are you hungry? He asked. She shook her head. When did you last eat? She held up 2 fingers. 2 days, maybe more. Maybe she had lost count. Wyatt's chest went tight. He stood. He found the bread Silas had left from supper. He cut a piece and set it on the table in front of her. She looked at the bread. Then she looked at him. Then she reached out with both hands and took it and ate it in 3 bites. And then she sat very still with her hands folded in her lap, and she waited for what Wyatt knew. He had seen it before, in the faces of people who had been hurt long enough to stop expecting anything but more. There is more, he said. You can have all of it. She looked at the bread. She looked at him. What do I owe? She said. The first was out of her mouth. The voice was small and very flat. Wyatt went still. What do you owe? For the bread, she said. If I do not pay now, I will pay more later. She was 4 years old. He could see it in the size of her. He could see it in the way her hands sat in her lap. 4 years old, and she had already learned that nothing on this earth was free. You do not owe anything for the bread, Wyatt said. He was careful with his voice. The bread is yours. She studied his face the way a soldier studies a hill before deciding whether to cross it. Are you sure? She said. I am sure. She reached for the bread, slower this time, like she was learning to believe it would not vanish. She ate it in smaller bites. He sat across from her at the kitchen table far enough that she had the whole room to herself if she needed it, and he tried to figure out how a 4-year-old girl had ended up barefoot and alone in Wyoming at midnight in January, and what kind of human being had let it happen. He had ideas. He did not like any of them. She fell asleep, sitting up, the second piece of bread still in her hand. Wyatt caught her before she could slide off the chair. He settled her on the kitchen floor near the stove, and he wrapped her in the blanket from the back of his chair. She curled into it without waking. She drew her knees up to her chest, and she made herself as small as she could possibly be. Even in sleep she was hiding. Wyatt sat back down at the table. The candle on the table burned steady. He had kept it lit every night for 6 years. The same place, the same holder. He replaced the candle when it burned down, but the flame had not gone out. His son had been afraid of the dark. His name had been Eli. He had been 8 years old. In the autumn of 1881, Wyatt had been chasing the Harding gang through the badlands south of Laramie when the wire came. Eli had pneumonia. Bad. Margaret was asking him to come home. Wyatt had been 3 days out, and the country was rough, and he had told himself he was making the best time a man could make. He had ridden 2 horses to the bone to get back. He arrived an hour after his son had stopped breathing. Margaret did not say anything. That was the worst of it. She did not say a word. She stood by the bed with her hand on the boy's chest where his small heart had finally given up its fight, and she looked at Wyatt across the room with an expression he had never seen on her face before. It was the face of a woman who had already accepted something as inevitable that she had hoped would not be. She lived another year, the kind of dying that does not need a doctor's name. She faded the way light fades in a room when no one comes to keep the lamps lit. Wyatt sat with her at the end, and he held her hand, and she did not open her eyes. He buried her next to Eli in the small fenced ground behind the church in Red Creek. He turned in his marshal's badge the next week. He sold the house in town. He bought the small ranch out by the creek, and he hired Silas Pritchard, who had worked with his father back in Kansas, and he stopped speaking to anyone who did not need speaking to. That was 6 years ago. The candle on the kitchen table had been burning since the night of the funerals. Eli had been afraid of the dark. Margaret used to leave a lamp by his bed. Wyatt had taken to keeping the candle going in case some part of his boy was still somewhere in the country, somewhere in the dark, still scared, still needing a light on. He looked at the small girl asleep on his kitchen floor. He looked at the candle. The candle stays lit, he said quietly to no one. Outside hooves struck ice. 40 minutes had passed. Silas had ridden hard. Dr. Thompson Whitfield came in through the kitchen door with her medical bag in one hand and the particular look on her face she wore when she was already calculating what she was going to find before she had found it. Tamsin was 42 years old. She was the only doctor in 3 counties willing to actually be a doctor, and she had stopped caring what men thought of her somewhere around her 30th birthday. She had buried Eli with Wyatt. She had buried Margaret with him a year later. She had watched him go quiet over the next 6 years, and she had never once told him what she thought of it, because that was not her job. She took one look at the bundle on the floor by the stove, and she knelt down without a word. Hey, sweetheart. Her voice dropped to a thing Wyatt almost never heard out of her. Soft, patient. My name is Tamsin. I am going to take a look at your feet. Is that all right? The girl woke. She saw Tamsin's face. She flinched back against the warm side of the stove. She is safe, Wyatt said. Best doctor in the territory. Only doctor in the territory, Tamsen muttered. But she kept her voice level. She kept her hands visible. She moved slow. The girl watched her the way a cornered animal watches something it is not yet sure is a threat. Tamsin examined both feet without speaking. Then she sat back, and her face did something complicated. Frostbite, she said. Blisters forming. No black. She keeps warm. She keeps these off the ground for a few days. She is going to be fine. She paused. Another hour outside in that cold Wyatt, and we would be talking about taking these off at the ankles. Wyatt said nothing. There was nothing to say to that. Tamsin reached gently for the girl's sleeve. She moved it back, and she went absolutely still. Wyatt stood up. The bruises covered the child's left arm from wrist to elbow. Old ones, yellow at the edges, fading. New ones, deep purple, fresh enough to still be swelling. The pattern was not random. He knew what random bruising looked like on a child. This was not that. This was the shape that fingers leave when they grip too hard again and again in the same place. Tamsin pulled the collar of the dress aside. There was more. Wyatt walked to the window and stood with his back to the room for a long moment, because what he was feeling did not belong in his face in front of a child. Kitchen, Tamsin said quietly, "You and me. Now." Silas took her place by the stove. The girl watched him with those dark eyes. Silas sat down on the floor with his back against the wall, and he did not try to touch her or talk to her. He just sat. The girl looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at the candle. Then she closed her eyes. In the back corner of the kitchen, Tamsin kept her voice low. "Those marks are not from a fall," she said. "I know. Someone has been hitting that child. Not once. Regularly. Over a long period. I know. Do you know who?" "No." "Do you know where she came from?" "No." Tamsin looked at him. They had known each other 12 years. She had stitched him up after more situations than either of them liked to remember. She had been at the funerals. She had watched him become the man who walked through the motions of being alive, without ever quite being alive. "I should report this," she said. "The sheriff ought to know. The sheriff is going to ask where she came from. Then the sheriff is going to send her back to whoever did this." "Wyatt." "Whoever did this to her, Tamsin." She was quiet a long time. "2 days," she said finally. "I can sit on the report for 2 days. After that, I have professional obligations I cannot ignore." She held his eye. "Find out where she came from. Find out who did this. Because taking in a stray child is not the same as taking in a stray dog. Do you understand me? I understand. Do you?" because you cannot feed her for a week and then turn her over to the county. That is worse than not starting. Wyatt looked at the small shape under the blanket by the stove. Silas had laid another blanket over her without being asked. She had curled her fingers into the edge of it in her sleep, holding on. I am not handing her to anyone, Wyatt said. Tamsin studied him for a long moment. Then she picked up her bag. She needs real food in the morning, she said, not whatever whiskey and regret you have been living on. I will be back. She left. Silas eventually went back to bed at Wyatt's insistence. Wyatt sat at the kitchen table alone. The candle burned on. The wind worked at the walls of the house and the walls held. He had lived alone in this room for 6 years. He had eaten alone in it. He had slept above it. He had worked from before sunrise to after dark in order to keep from sitting still long enough to think. He had kept the candle burning, and he had told himself it was enough, that it was something, that it was a man who had not entirely let go. He looked at the child sleeping on his floor. She belonged to someone. Someone had done that to their own ward. He put his elbows on the table and pressed his hands over his eyes and sat that way for a long time. He woke at first light to the sound of small feet on the wood floor. She was standing in the kitchen doorway watching him, wrapped in the blanket like a cape, those dark eyes doing that thing again, calculating, measuring, waiting for whatever was going to happen to happen. Morning, he said. She did not answer. Did you sleep all right? A small nod. Are you hungry? Her eyes went to the stove. She did not say anything. Wyatt stood and moved slow. He put oatmeal on. He could feel her watching every move he made. He kept his hands visible. He kept his body angled away from her. He gave her the whole room. When the oatmeal was done, he set a bowl on the table, and he sat back down in his chair by the window, 6 feet away, out of arm's reach. Come and eat, he said. She came to the table. She climbed up into the chair the way a child climbs, who has done it before, who knows this kind of kitchen, even though she has never been in this one. She looked at the bowl. She looked at him. It is yours, Wyatt said. She picked up the spoon and she ate, too fast, the way a person eats when she has learned that food can be taken away. She finished in less than a minute. Then she sat back, hands folded, waiting. There is more, Wyatt said. She shook her head. You sure? Yes, she said. The second word out of her in 12 hours. He counted them the way a man counts things that matter. Silas came in from outside, stomped the snow off his boots. He set a brown paper bundle on the table tied with twine. "Rode into town early," he said. "Mrs. Porter at the general store sent these. Said take what fits, pay later." He glanced at the small girl. "Said to tell the little one they are a gift." The girl stared at the bundle. "What do I owe?" she said. Silas blinked. "What for?" "The clothes." She looked at the bundle with those careful eyes. "What do I owe for them?" Wyatt's throat went tight. 2 days in his house, and she still asked the question. The lesson had been driven into her too deep to come out fast. "You do not owe a thing," Silas said gently. "They are given. Miss Porter has a good heart." The girl looked at Wyatt. He nodded. "It is true," he said. She reached out and touched the bundle with 2 fingers, just the tips, as if testing whether it was real. Then she pulled her hand back. "Thank you," she whispered. She said it like armor, like she had learned that those 2 words kept adults from getting angry. Silas glanced at Wyatt over her head. Wyatt looked at the window. Alice jerked his head toward the door. Wyatt followed him out onto the porch. The morning was gray and heavy and cold, the kind of cold that had settled in and was planning to stay. "I asked around," Silas said. "Careful. In town. And orphan train came through Rollins 2 months back. Maybe 20 children. Families all around the territory came and picked through them." He paused. "Like livestock at auction." Wyatt's jaw set. "Who took her?" Silas was quiet a moment. "Sterling," he said. The name landed like a stone into still water. Augustus Sterling. The biggest cattle ranch in 3 counties. The richest man in the territory, if not the state. He sat on the town council. He had given the lumber for the east wing of the church. He had shaken the hand of the territorial governor when the man came through last summer. He smiled at everyone and meant nothing by it. His eyes were the wrong sort of friendly, the kind that watched exits, the kind that measured a man instead of seeing him. "You sure?" Wyatt said. "Sure as I can be. He took 2 children from that train. One of them was a boy, about 6, maybe 7. They say he ran off last month. Nobody looked very hard for him." Wyatt stared at the line of mountains in the distance. A 4-year-old girl, barefoot, alone, in Wyoming in January, miles from the Sterling place, in the dark, in the snow. She had not gotten lost. She had not wandered. She had run. "He is going to come looking," Silas said. "I know. He has the sheriff. He has Judge Wallace. He has half the territory in his pocket one way or another. I know that too." Silas studied him. They had known each other 20 years. Since before Eli was born. Since before Margaret died. since before Wyatt had become this hollowed out version of himself that still walked around calling itself a man. So what do you mean to do, boss? Wyatt looked back at the house. Through the kitchen window he could see the shape of her, small and still, at the table, holding the bundle of clothes, the way a child holds something she is not yet sure she is allowed to keep. Whatever I have to, Wyatt said. Silas was quiet a moment. Then he nodded, once, slowly. All right then, he said. I am with you. He turned toward the barn. That child needs feeding again soon, by the way. And you cannot cook worth a damn. Wyatt went back inside. She had opened the bundle. She was looking at the things inside. A small blue dress, wool stockings, a little gray coat that would actually fit her. She touched each piece carefully the way a person might touch a thing she was trying to memorize. Those are yours, Wyatt said. She looked up at him. What if they want them back? Nobody is taking anything back. She considered this. You cannot know that. I know it about this house. She looked at him for a long time with those dark ancient eyes. What is your name? She asked suddenly. Wyatt. Wyatt, she repeated very seriously, as if filing it away somewhere important. What is yours? A pause. Della, she said. Dellala. He would remember that. He was going to make sure everyone remembered that. Well, Dellala, he said. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. Looks like we have got some figuring out to do. She held the small blue dress against her chest with both hands. Are you going to send me back? She asked. The question was so direct, so flat, so completely without hope, that it hit Wyatt. Somewhere he had thought was past hurting. No, he said, even if Mr. Sterling comes. He had done his level best not to let his face change when she said the name. He nodded. Even then, Della looked at him. He is going to come, she said. He always finds things that run from him. Maybe so. He has a lot of men. The sheriff is his friend. I know. So how are you going to stop him? Wyatt leaned forward. He put his elbows on the table. He looked her straight in the eye. Have you ever watched a bull try to get through a fence post? He said. He can weigh 1,000 pounds. Does not matter. Post just has to hold. Della stared at him. You are the fence post, she said. That is right. She thought about this for a long moment, the way a 4-year-old thinks about something, with her whole face. Okay, she said finally. She set the small blue dress down on the table in front of her and smoothed it flat with both palms. Okay. He did not have time to feel pleased about that, because somewhere across the territory Augustus Sterling was already saddling a horse. Sterling came on the second day. Wyatt heard the riders first. He was in the barn with Silas when the sound reached them. Multiple sets of hooves moving with the deliberate pace of men who were not in a hurry because they did not believe they needed to be. Wyatt set down the bridle in his hands. How many? 4, maybe 5. They looked at each other. Silas reached for the rifle hanging on the barn wall without being asked. Wyatt checked his revolver, checked it again, holstered it. He walked out of the barn into the gray morning light, and Silas fell in beside him. Tamsin had come back early to check Della's feet and was still in the house. That was either good or bad depending on what was about to happen. Augustus Sterling rode at the front. He was 55 years old, thick through the shoulders, with silver at the temples and the kind of face that had been handsome once and knew it. He sat his horse like a man who owned everything within sight, which in his case was nearly true. 4 ranch hands rode behind him, all armed. He smiled when he saw Wyatt. The smile reached the surface of his face and stopped. "Calloway," he said. He tipped his hat. "Been a while, Sterling." Wyatt did not move from where he stood. "Cold morning for a ride." "It is." Sterling looked around the property. Easy, unhurried. The way a man looks at something he is considering buying. "I have got a problem, Calloway. Hoping you can help me with it. Lost something a couple of nights back. Something important. A little girl, 4 years old." Sterling kept his voice warm and concerned. "Took her in from the orphan train out of Rollins. Charity case, you understand. Trying to give her a proper home." He spread his hands. Sincerity and sorrow. She wandered off somehow. "I have been worried sick." Wyatt said nothing. Sterling let the silence sit for a moment. Then he smiled again. "Word around town," he said, "is your man Silas was at the Porter store yesterday. Bought children's clothing." He tilted his head a fraction. "Now, I am not accusing you of anything. I am sure there is a perfectly good explanation." "There is," Wyatt said. "I bought clothes for a stray." One of the riders behind Sterling made a small sound that might have been a laugh. Sterling silenced him without turning around. "Calloway." The smile did not move. "Let us not waste each other's time. I have got legal papers signed by Judge Wallace himself. That child is my ward until she reaches her majority. I am just trying to bring her home. She is not here. Then you will not mind if my men take a look." "I mind." Something shifted underneath the smile, something colder. "You are putting yourself in a difficult position," Sterling said. "That child is my legal responsibility. If you are harboring her, that is a criminal matter. You want Sheriff Holloway involved in this." Sheriff is welcome anytime. And Judge Wallace. Wyatt looked at him steadily. Bring whoever you like. Sterling studied him. The calculation behind those friendly eyes worked through something, adding up columns, deciding on an approach. Then he nodded once, short and final. All right, he said. All right, Calloway. We will do this the slow way. He gathered his reins, then he paused. You know what I think. I think that little girl told you some stories. Scared children say all kinds of things when they do not want to go home. And a man who lost his own boy the way you lost yours. Sterling let the pause hang, deliberate. Well, he might be looking for something to fill that up, might hear those stories and want them to be true. Wyatt's hands stayed still at his sides. Get off my land, he said. Sterling turned his horse. His riders fell in behind him. At the edge of the property, he stopped and looked back once. 3 days, Calloway, he said pleasantly. Think it over. They rode out. Silas let out a long breath. He is going to come back, he said, with Holloway. I know. What do we do? Wyatt turned back towards the house. Through the kitchen window he could see two shapes. Tamsin standing, Della sitting at the table. Even from here he could see that Della was very still. The kind of still that meant she had heard everything. He went inside. Tamsin was at the kitchen counter, her arms crossed. Della was at the table, both hands flat on the wood in front of her. Her face was doing that blank, careful thing it did when she was managing something too big for a 4-year-old to manage. He was here, Della said. She said it the way a person states a fact about the weather. Flat, resigned, like she had known it was coming and had only been waiting for it to arrive. Wyatt sat down across from her. You heard. She looked at the table. Through the window. You did not need to hear that. I already knew what he sounds like, Della said, when he is being nice to people. She looked up. He is nicer to strangers than to me. She stopped. Her jaw tightened in a way that looked wrong on a 4-year-old face. Too controlled. Too practiced. To me. Wyatt waited. He is going to come back, she said. He always comes back. I know. And he is going to take me. No. She looked at him directly. You cannot stop him. He has the sheriff and the judge. He has lots of men. You have only got Silas. That is a fair assessment, Wyatt said. Della blinked. She had expected an argument, not agreement. But here is the thing, he said. A man like Starling has spent his whole life getting what he wants because people move out of his way. The first time somebody does not move, he kept his voice level. Easy. the same tone he would use explaining something simple and true. He does not know what to do with that. Della stared at him. You are really not going to move, she said. No, ma'am. The formality of it seemed to surprise her. She was quiet for a moment, working through something. Then she looked at the candle on the table, the one that had been burning all night again, the same as the first night. My mama used to keep a candle on, she said quietly. Before. Wyatt went very still. Tamsin across the room did not move either. Before, Wyatt said carefully. Before the train. Della touched the candle holder with one finger. Just the tip. She said it kept the bad things away. But it did not. She pulled her finger back. She got sick anyway. I am sorry about your mama, Wyatt said. Della nodded. Very small, very serious. Me too. Then she looked up at him. Why do you keep yours burning? He had not told her about Eli. He had not planned to. But she was looking at him with those dark eyes, and she had just told him about her mother, and there was a kind of fairness required in that exchange that he could feel without being able to name. My boy, he said, Eli. He was scared of the dark. After he died, he stopped, tried again. I kept it going in case he needed a light somewhere. Della looked at the candle for a long time. Maybe they can both use it, she said finally. You're Eli and my mama. Something cracked open in Wyatt's chest. Not breaking, more like a window long painted shut, suddenly able to move. Yeah, he said. Maybe so. Tamsin cleared her throat quietly and excused herself to check her medical bag, which did not need checking. She was giving them the room. He appreciated that about her. Della slid down from her chair and came around the table. She stood next to Wyatt's chair, not quite touching him, looking at the candle. Can I stay by you? She asked. Yeah, Wyatt said. You can stay by me. She leaned against his arm. Just that lean. The way a small child leans when she has decided something. When she has made up her mind about a person and is done deliberating. He felt the warmth of her, the small solid weight against his arm, and he did not move because he was afraid that if he moved, she would remember to be afraid again. They sat like that, while the candle burned and the wind came down off the mountains and pressed at the walls of the house. Outside, the morning thinned toward noon. Silas worked in the barn. Tamsin bandaged Della's feet again, slow and careful, and left for town with the promise to come back at dusk. The day went by the way any day goes by on a Wyoming ranch in January. Slow, cold, quiet, as though nothing in the world had changed. But everything had. That night, after the small girl had finally slept, Wyatt sat at the kitchen table with the candle between his hands, 3 days. Sterling had said 3 days. That meant he would come back with the sheriff, with papers, with more men. Wyatt thought about Eli, about the birthday party he had missed because there were outlaws to chase. He had told himself the outlaws were more important, just the once, just that one time. He thought about Margaret looking at him at the funeral, not with anger. Anger he could have stood, with something worse. He had spent 6 years with that look living behind his eyes. He looked at the candle. He looked at the small bundle of fabric and the breath that was sleeping in the back room he had made up for her. He thought about a 4-year-old who had walked 5 miles in the snow and the bare feet because the house ahead had a light in the window. He had not been there for Eli. He was going to be here for this. Augustus Sterling was coming. Wyatt could feel it the way he had felt trouble coming his whole career. A low pressure in his chest, a tightening along the back of his neck. Let him come. There was a fence post in his way now. Within 48 hours, the most powerful man in Wyoming was going to ride up the road to this small ranch with 4 armed riders and a piece of paper signed by a crooked judge. And Wyatt Calloway, who had not stood in front of anything that mattered for 6 long years, was going to have to decide. Was he just a fence post? Or was he going to become something far more dangerous? He blew out the candle. He replaced it with a fresh one. He lit it again. Some things were worth keeping going. The candle stays lit, he said quietly. To the empty room, to the boy who could not hear him any more, to the small girl in the back room who could. The flame steadied. The wind kept up its work against the walls. And somewhere out there in the dark beyond the candle's reach, Augustus Sterling was already deciding how he was going to take her back. Sheriff Coleman Holloway rode up the next morning. He came alone, which was either a good sign or a bad one. Wyatt had not decided which when he stepped out onto the porch to meet him. Coleman was 50 years old, carrying more weight than he had when they had ridden together 15 years ago out of Laramie, with a face that had made peace with too many things it should not have made peace with. He dismounted slowly like a man who had argued with himself the whole ride over and had not entirely won. Wyatt. Coleman. Sterling came to see me. I figured. Coleman took off his hat and turned it in his hands. He did not look at Wyatt directly. Says you have got a child he has got legal claim to. Did he say what he did to her? Says she is a runaway. Says she tells stories. The bruises on her neck tell stories too, Wyatt said. He kept his voice even. So do the ones on her arms. Come look for yourself. Coleman was quiet. Wyatt stepped forward. You and me rode together for 3 years out of Laramie. I know what you are walking into here. I know Sterling owns half the territory and he has got Wallace in his pocket. And you answer to a county council that answers to men who answer to Sterling. I know all of it. Then you know what I am up against. What I know Wyatt said is that there is a 4-year-old girl in my kitchen who walked God knows how far in January in bare feet to get away from that man. You think she did that because she tells stories? Coleman turned his hat around again. Wyatt, come look at her, Coleman. That is all I am asking. Just come in and look at her. A long silence. Then Coleman put his hat back on his head and walked towards the porch steps. Della was at the kitchen table when they came in. She was walking with a piece of charcoal and some brown paper Silas had given her, drawing something with intense concentration. She looked up when the door opened and saw Coleman's badge and went absolutely still. Coleman stopped 3 feet inside the door. He looked at Della. Della looked at him. Coleman's eyes moved to her neck, to the bruises that were fading now, but still readable to anyone who had ever walked law. Then to her arm, where the sleeve had slipped. His jaw moved once. "Hello there," Coleman said. He kept his voice quiet. "My name is Coleman. I just want to talk if that is all right." Della said nothing. She looked at Wyatt. Wyatt nodded. She looked back at Coleman. "Okay," she said, very careful. Coleman moved a chair out from the table and sat down, slow, making himself smaller. He was a big man, but he had good instincts about children. Wyatt remembered that about him. "What is your name?" Coleman asked. "Della." "How old are you?" "Della." She held up 4 fingers. Coleman looked at her arm. He looked at her neck. He looked at her face. "Do you know who gave you those marks on your arm?" he asked. Della looked at the table. "You do not have to be scared," Coleman said. "You can tell me the truth, Mr. Starling," she said, so quietly Wyatt almost did not hear it. "Did he hurt you more than once?" Della nodded. "Did he hurt anyone else?" She went very still. Her hands came together in her lap, and she held them tight, one inside the other. "There was a girl," she said. "Her name was Pearl. She ran away." She paused. "Before me." Coleman looked at Wyatt over her head. Wyatt looked back. "Della," Coleman said, "I want you to keep drawing your picture while I talk to Wyatt outside for a minute. Can you do that?" Della picked up her charcoal. "Are you going to make me go back?" she asked. She did not look up when she said it. She just held the charcoal and waited. Coleman did not answer right away. That half second of delay was its own kind of answer. I am going to talk to Wyatt, he said again. They stepped outside. Silas was near the barn, close enough to be within earshot and not pretending otherwise. She is 4 years old. Coleman Wyatt said, "Look at what is on her." "I see it." "Then do your job." Coleman turned away from him and looked out at the road. "Sterling has got papers, Wyatt. Legal guardianship signed by a territorial judge. My hands." "Your hands work fine. I have seen you use them. It is not that simple." "It is exactly that simple. There is a child in there with marks all over her body. Another child ran from the same house and nobody has seen him since. You want to stand here and tell me your hands are tied?" Coleman turned back. Something was working behind his eyes, something that looked like a man trying to decide which version of himself he wanted to be. "I can give you a week," he said quietly. After that, if Sterling pushes hard, a week is what I can do. You find me something I can take to a real judge, not Wallace. Someone outside this county. You find me evidence beyond a child's word and your word, and I will use it." He stopped, started again. "He is going to come back. And when he does, I am going to have to do something." He mounted his horse and looked down at Wyatt. "There is a woman," he said. "Imogen Bennett. Lives out past Miller's Creek. She worked at Sterling's place. Left sudden about 6 months ago. Left so fast she did not even take her coat." He gathered his reins. "I am not telling you to go see her. I am just telling you she exists." He rode away. Wyatt stood in the cold for a moment. Then Silas was beside him. "I will keep watch tonight," Silas said. "Case Sterling gets impatient and does not wait for the law. Get some rest first. I will take the first watch." Silas nodded, started toward the barn, stopped. "Boss," he said, "that little girl in there—" He did not finish the sentence, just shook his head in a way that said everything. "I know," Wyatt said. He went back inside. Della was still at the table. She had finished her drawing. She held it out to him when he came close. A piece of brown paper with charcoal marks that were a house. A wobbly square with a triangle on top and a candle in the window and two shapes outside, one tall and one small. "Is that us?" Wyatt asked. Della looked at the drawing. "It is the house with the light," she said. "So you can find it in the dark." Wyatt took the drawing. He held it carefully by the edges. "That is a good drawing. My mama taught me," she said. She watched him hold it. "You can keep it if you want." "I want." He folded the paper once slowly, so as not to crease across the candle she had drawn, and he put it inside his coat over his heart. He rode out before dawn. Silas was already up when Wyatt came downstairs. Coffee on. Two biscuits, wrapped in a cloth on the table. The old man did not say anything. He just handed Wyatt the cloth and checked the rifle by the door without being asked. "She is still sleeping?" Wyatt asked. "Checked on her 20 minutes ago." "Sleeping hard." Silas leaned against the counter. "How far is Miller's Creek in this cold?" "8 miles, maybe 9 with the drifts." "You will be back by afternoon if you push. That is the plan." Silas nodded. "I will stay close to the Howard house. Keep her inside." He paused. "What do I tell her when she wakes up and you are gone?" Wyatt thought about that. "Tell her I went to find something that helps. Tell her I am coming back. And if she does not believe the second part, tell her anyway, every time she asks." Silas looked at him with that expression he had been wearing for 30 years, equal parts exasperation and something that was probably as close to devotion as Silas Pritchard ever got. "Go on then, before it gets any colder," which I did not think was possible, but here we are. Wyatt rode hard and he kept his mind on the work of riding, which was the only way he knew how to keep it off everything else. The horse knew the territory better than most men, found the solid ground under the drifts without being told. Wyatt gave it room to do that and concentrated on what he was riding toward. Imogen Bennett left Sterling's employment 6 months ago without her coat. Coleman Holloway had mentioned her name the way a man mentions a thing he cannot officially know, but cannot entirely keep to himself either. That meant Coleman had thought about her, had wondered, had decided there was something there worth pointing at, even if he could not point at it directly. That was enough. The Bennett cabin sat at the edge of Miller's Creek, small and well kept. Smoke from the chimney. Wyatt dismounted 50 yards out, tied his horse to a fence post, walked in the rest of the way with his hands visible and his hat pushed back. People who had run from something answered cautious knocks with loaded guns, and he needed her talking, not shooting. He was still 20 feet from the door when it opened. The woman who stood in the doorway was 40 years old, or close to it. Lean, the way people got lean when they had been through something. Brown hair pulled back severe. Eyes that moved to his hands first and his face second. She held a shotgun at her hip, not raised, not lowered. "I do not know you," she said. "No, ma'am." "My name is Wyatt Calloway. I ranch out near Red Creek. I am not here to cause you any trouble." People who are not here to cause trouble generally do not show up at a woman's door at dawn. Fair point. He stopped where he was. "I need to talk to you about Augustus Sterling." Her hands tightened on the shotgun. Every other part of her went still in a way that was its own kind of answer. I have got nothing to say about that man. I have got a 4-year-old girl at my ranch, Wyatt said. She walked out of Sterling's place barefoot in January. She has got bruises from her wrist to her shoulder and marks on her neck. And she woke up the first morning in my house and asked how much she owed for the food she had eaten. He kept his voice level, kept his hands where she could see them. She is 4 years old, Mrs. Bennet. Whatever you know, whatever you saw, I need it, because I have got 1 week before Starling uses his papers and his sheriff and his judge to take her back. Imogen Bennet stood in her doorway and looked at him for a long moment. "Come in," she said, "before someone sees your horse." Inside, she poured coffee without asking, and set it in front of him, and sat across the table with the shotgun leaning against the wall behind her, close enough to reach, far enough to be a gesture of something, not trust exactly, provisional willingness. How bad, she asked. Bad enough that she ran in January without shoes. Imogen wrapped both hands around her own cup. "I worked for Sterling 8 months," she said. "Cook. The work was fine. The pay was what he promised. The first month I thought I had landed somewhere decent." She paused. "Then I started noticing things." Wyatt waited. "The children he took from that orphan train. There were 3 of them when I started. A boy maybe 7 and 2 girls younger than that." She looked at the table. "He kept them separate from the ranch hands. Kept them in the back part of the house, a room of the kitchen, locked at night, locked from the outside." Her jaw set. "I heard them sometimes through the wall, crying. Sometimes not crying, which was worse. One of the girls, the older one, she must have been 5 or 6, she would knock on the wall, sometimes in a pattern, 3 knocks, then 2, like she was checking if someone could hear her." Imogen stopped, started again. "I started knocking back, 3 and 2, so she would know someone was there." Wyatt's hands were flat on the table. He did not move them. "I started leaving extra food near the room," Imogen said. "Bread, sometimes an apple, whatever I could take from the kitchen without it being noticed. One morning I came in early and found the older girl curled up by the kitchen door. She had gotten out somehow. I never knew how. She had eaten the bread I had left and gone back in before anyone saw her. She looked up at him. She was so small, and she looked at me like she was surprised I had not yelled at her for it." "What happened to her?" Wyatt asked. "The older girl." Imogen was quiet for a moment. "She got sick. Fever. I told Sterling she needed a doctor. He told me to give her willow bark tea and let it run its course." She set down her cup. 3 days later, she was gone. Sterling told the ranch hands she had passed in her sleep, told them it was the fever. Her name, Wyatt said, Pearl. The name landed in the small kitchen like something heavy. Wyatt looked at her. You do not believe. She just died of fever. I believe the fever was real, Imogen said carefully. I believe a doctor could have treated it. I believe Sterling decided. A doctor cost money and questions, and the child did not. She met his eyes. That is what I believe, the boy Wyatt said. Wesley. He ran about a week after the girl died. I think he saw what happened to her and decided he would rather take his chances outside than stay and wait for the same. They find him. Not that I heard of. Wyatt let that sit. A 7-year-old boy alone in Wyoming winter. The odds on that were not odds he wanted to calculate. Why did you leave? He asked. Imogen did not answer at first. She turned her cup slowly on the table. Sterling caught me leaving extra bread by the room. Her voice went flat. He did not yell. That was the thing. He was very calm about it. He sat me down at the kitchen table and he talked to me the way you talk to someone who said something foolish and you are too polite to laugh at them. She looked at her hands. He said if I ever talked about what I had seen inside that house, he would make sure I could not talk to anyone about anything ever again. He said it pleasantly, like he was explaining something simple, and then he told me my services were no longer needed and to be gone by morning. You left without your coat. I left without my coat, she confirmed, because I wanted to be far enough from that place before it got dark that it did not matter about the coat. Wyatt sat with that for a moment. Will you testify? He said. If I can get this in front of a real judge. Not Wallace. Someone from outside this county. Will you say what you just told me? Imogen looked at him. Sterling told me he would kill me, she said. He said it like he was remarking on the weather. I know. You know. But that does not make it less true. No, Wyatt said. It does not. She was quiet for a long time, long enough that he did not rush it, did not push it. Some decisions needed all the room they took. That little girl at your place, Imogen said finally. The one who walked out barefoot. What is her name? Della. Something moved through Imogen's face. Della, she repeated quietly, like the name meant something. Is she all right? Her feet. Dr. Wetfield says they will be fine. She is eating. She is sleeping. He paused. She is still scared, but she is starting to believe maybe she does not have to be. Imogen looked at the wall for a moment. Then she looked back at him. If I testify, she said, Sterling will come for me. You understand that? He will come for me the way he came for those children when they ran. I will protect you. You are one man with one ranch hand. Right now, yes. She studied him. What does that mean? It means I am working on the rest. He held her eyes. I am going to Reverend Whitaker in town today. He has the ear of every family in Red Creek. If the church stands behind you, Sterling cannot touch you without touching every person in that congregation. You think Whitaker will stand up to Sterling? Sterling built half that church. I think Whitaker is a man who knows the difference between what is comfortable and what is right. I think he has been choosing comfortable for a while now, and sometimes all a man needs is someone to walk through the door and give him a reason to choose different. Imogen looked at him for a long moment. You sound very sure about that. I am sure about Della Wyatt said. The rest I am working on. Another long silence. Then Imogen stood. She went to the window, stood with her back to him. Come back tomorrow, she said. Give me tonight to think it through. Pray on it. She did not turn around. If I decide yes, I will need somewhere to go after. I cannot come back here. Sterling will know. And this cabin is not. It is not safe after. You will come to my ranch. Same protection as Della. And if Sterling comes to your ranch, then he will find out what is on the other side of a fence post that does not move. She turned around then, looked at him with an expression he could not entirely read, part disbelief, part something that wanted to be hope, and was not letting itself get there yet. Tomorrow, she said, come back tomorrow morning. He rode back toward the ranch with his mind on Reverend Whitaker and the clock running down. He was still half a mile out when he saw the second set of tracks in the snow, fresh, multiple horses coming in from the west road and leaving the same way. He pushed his horse to a run. Silas met him at the barn door, and Wyatt could tell from how Silas was standing that something had happened. Sterling Wyatt said, "It was not a question. 4 men came while you were gone," Silas said. His voice was tight. Rode around the property slow, looking at everything, measuring it. Where is Della? Inside. Thompson is with her. I kept them in the kitchen away from the windows. Wyatt went past him toward the house. He heard Thompson's voice before he opened the door, steady and calm. And then Della, smaller, higher. He pushed through. Della was at the kitchen table with Thompson beside her, and when Della saw Wyatt, her whole face changed. She slid off the chair and crossed the kitchen in 3 steps and put both arms around his waist and held on. I am here, he said. He put his hand on the back of her head. I told Silas to tell you I was coming back. He told me her voice was muffled against his coat. I did not believe it until now. I know. She held on for another moment. Then she pulled back and looked up at him with those dark eyes that always seemed to be calculating something. They came while you were gone, she said. Sterling's men. I saw the tracks. I saw them. They looked in the barn window. I saw them from the kitchen. Silas told me to stay back, and I did. But I saw one of them looked at the house for a long time, at the upstairs window. Which one? My window, she said. Wyatt looked at Tamsin over Della's head. Tamsin gave him a small, tight nod that said everything about what she thought it meant. You are moving rooms tonight, Wyatt said to Della. Down to the back room, away from the road. Okay. No argument. No. She looked up at him. Did you find the woman, the one the sheriff told you about? He had not told her about Imogene Bennett, but she had heard more of his conversation with Coleman than he had realized. He made a note to himself. Della heard most things and forgot none of them. I found her. Will she help? I think so. I am going back tomorrow to hear her final answer. Della nodded slowly, processing this. What happens if she says no? Then I find another way. What other way? I do not know yet, Wyatt said, but I will find it. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she went back to the table and climbed into her chair and picked up the piece of brown paper she had been drawing on. A new drawing, different from the first. She held it out to him. It was a stick figure of a man on a horse, and underneath it, in careful crooked letters, that a 4-year-old had worked very hard at 2 words. Come back. He looked at it, then he looked at her. Dr. Whitfield taught me the letters, Della said. I told her what to spell. I copied it. Wyatt folded the drawing carefully and put it inside his coat pocket next to the first one, inside over his heart. That evening, after Della was settled in her new room, after Tamsin had left with a promise to return in the morning, after Silas had taken the first watch outside, Wyatt sat at the kitchen table with the candle burning and thought through everything he had. He had a child's testimony, admissible in weight, questionable in court. He had Imogen Bennett, who had seen things and was considering saying so. He had Coleman Holloway, who had given him a week and a name and could not officially do more than that. He had Silas and Tamsin, and a ranch that Sterling's men were already circling like they were measuring it for a coffin. He had 6 days left. He pulled out the 2 drawings Della had made and set them side by side on the table, the house with the candle in the window, the man on the horse with "Come back" written underneath. He thought about Eli, about the night he had not been home, about the way Margaret had looked at him at the funeral. The look of a woman who had already accepted something as inevitable that she had hoped would not be. He had spent 6 years with that look behind his eyes. He looked at Della's drawings. He had not been there for Eli. He was going to be here for this. Tomorrow he would ride back to Imogen Bennet and get her answer. And then he would go to Whitaker at the church and make whatever case needed making. And if Whitaker would not move, he would find someone who would. And if a week was not enough, then he would find a way to make more time. Because Augustus Sterling was a man who had operated his whole life on the assumption that everyone in his way would eventually step aside. Wyatt had built his whole career on being the thing that did not. He blew out the candle, replaced it, lit the new one. Some things were worth keeping going. At the bottom of the stairs, he stopped and listened. Quiet from the back room. Della sleeping or lying still. Enough that it amounted to the same thing. Safe for tonight. He went up the stairs and sat in the chair outside her door, his back against the wall, his revolver across his knee. He rode out at first light again the next morning, and Imogen Bennet was waiting on a porch when he arrived. She had a coat on, a small bag at her feet, the shotgun in her hand pointed at the ground. She looked like a woman who had spent the night arguing with herself and had finally come out on one side of it, though not without cost. Her eyes were red at the edges. Her jaw was set. "I am going to need that protection you mentioned," she said, before he had even dismounted. "I am not going back into that cabin after today. He will know I talked. He will know by tonight, maybe sooner. I know." Wyatt tied his horse. "You will come back to my ranch. You will stay there until this is done." Imogen picked up her bag. It was small. A woman who had already learned once that leaving in a hurry was possible and had packed accordingly. "I am going to tell you everything," she said. "Everything I saw, everything I heard, all 8 months." She looked at him steadily. "And then you had better make sure it counts, because I am burning my life down to do this, Calloway. I need it to count." "It will count," Wyatt said. She held his eyes for another moment. Then she nodded once and walked to his horse. They rode to Red Creek together, Imogen behind him in the saddle, the bag across her lap. She talked on the way, quietly, steadily, her voice close to his ear over the wind, and what she told him filled in the spaces he had been walking around for 3 days. The locked room, the children's names, the older girl who had died of a fever that had no business being fatal, the boy Wesley who had run and had not been found, things she had heard and things she had seen, and the night she had walked out without her coat because the coat was not worth the time it took to grab it. By the time they rode into Red Creek, Wyatt had heard enough to know that Imogen Bennet's testimony alone could put Augustus Sterling away if he could get it in front of the right judge. The problem was the right judge was 2 counties over, and getting to him meant going through Wallace first. And Wallace had eaten dinner at Sterling's table more times than anyone cared to count. He needed Reverend Obadiah Whitaker. The church was a simple white building at the center of town, the kind of building that had been put up fast and added onto slowly as the community grew around it. Wyatt had been inside it exactly twice, once for Eli's funeral, once for Margaret's. He had not gone back after that. God and he had reached an understanding of mutual distance that had suited them both well enough until 3 days ago. He left Imogen at Dr. Whitfield's office. Thompson had agreed to that arrangement when Wyatt had stopped by that morning before dawn. She had agreed to it in the brisk, no discussion way she agreed to things she considered obviously correct. Wyatt walked to the church alone. Whitaker was inside replacing a broken pew board. He was 60 years old, tall, gone thin with age, white hair, hands that had done more physical work in his life than most people assumed about preachers. He looked up when Wyatt came in, read something in Wyatt's face, set down his hammer. "Wyatt Calloway," he said, "I wondered when you would come. You heard. This is a small town." Whitaker straightened. "I heard about the little girl the first day. I heard about Sterling going to your ranch the second day. I have been thinking about what I should do about it, and I have not liked any of the answers I have come up with." He looked at Wyatt steadily. "I assume you are here to give me a better one." "I am here to ask you to stand up," Wyatt said. "That is all. Just stand up." Whitaker walked to the front pew and sat down. After a moment, Wyatt sat beside him. "Sterling built the east wing of this building," Whitaker said. "His name is on the cornerstone. He is in the front pew every Sunday, and he gives more to this congregation than the next 4 families combined." He paused. "I have told myself that money is money, and a man's private life is between him and the God. I have told myself that suspicion is not evidence and gossip is not testimony." He was quiet. "I have told myself a lot of things. I have got a witness," Wyatt said. "A woman who worked in that house for 8 months. She is willing to testify, but she needs the church behind her. Reverend, she needs to know that if Sterling comes for her for talking, he is not just coming after one woman. He is coming after every person in your congregation who is willing to stand. And you think they will stand. I think you have got good people here who have been scared. I think scared people sometimes need someone they trust to tell them it is all right to be brave." Wyatt looked at him. "That is what you are for, is it not?" Whitaker was quiet for a long moment. There is a child named Della at my ranch, Wyatt said. 4 years old. She walked out of Sterling's place barefoot in January because she was more afraid of staying than she was of the cold. She watched another child die in that house. She did not want to wait around for the same. He kept his voice level. I have got 1 week. The week is almost gone. I need evidence in front of a real judge before Coleman runs out of room to hold Sterling off. And I need to know that the woman willing to give me that evidence is not going to be picked off in the dark the night before she can say a word. Whitaker put his elbows on his knees and looked at the floor. My father was a preacher, he said after a moment. Back in Missouri. Good man. Careful man. He preached forgiveness and charity and turning the other cheek. And he never once got out of his chair for anything that cost him something real. He was quiet. I have spent my whole ministry trying not to be him. And I look up one day and realize I have become him anyway, just with a nicer building. He stood. I will write to Judge Thaddeus Cooper in Cheyenne, he said. He is honest and he owes me nothing, which means Sterling cannot buy his decision. It will take 2 days to get a letter there and 2 days to get a response, assuming he moves quickly. 4 days. Yes, I have got maybe two. Whitaker looked at him. Then we need more than a letter. He reached for his coat. I am going door to door this afternoon. Every family in my congregation. I am going to tell them what is happening, and I am going to ask them to stand. He buttoned his coat. Some of them will not. Sterling runs accounts at the feed store at the mill. Plenty of people around here cannot afford to cross him, but some of them will. How many? Enough, Whitaker said with the tone of a man making a decision and sticking to it. I am going to make sure it is enough. They walked out of the church into the cold morning. Wyatt pulled on his gloves. Reverend, he said. Whitaker looked at him. Della drew me a picture of this church, Wyatt said. It was not entirely true. She had drawn a house, his house, but the shape of it was close enough. She does not know what it is. She has never been inside a church, but she drew it because she saw the steeple from the road and thought it looked like a place that had to let people in. Whitaker was quiet for a moment. Children see clearly, he said. Yes, sir, they do. He collected Imogen from Tamsin's office, explained Whitaker's plan, watched Imogen's face go through something complicated when she heard the Reverend's name. Whitaker never struck me as a man who would cross Sterling, she said. He is crossing him today, Wyatt said. He rode back to the ranch with Imogen behind him and the remaining hours of his week running down in the back of his mind like water from a cracked trough, visible, constant, impossible to stop. Silas met them at the barn with a face that said something had happened. Letter came, Silas said, delivered by one of Sterling's men, left at the gate. He held out a sealed envelope. Wyatt opened it. The handwriting was neat, measured, the kind of penmanship that belonged to a man who had been taught that presentation was everything. The message was 4 lines. Your week is PT is up, Calloway. I am coming for what is mine tomorrow morning. Come with a marshal and a judge, or come with your coffin, your choice. Either way. S. Wyatt folded the letter, put it in his coat pocket next to Della's drawings. That is tomorrow, Silas said. I can count Silas. What do we do? Wyatt looked at the house, at the back window where Della's new room was, where he could see the edge of a small curtain that she had arranged herself, tucked back on one side so she could see out, but anyone looking in would mostly see fabric. Smart instinct for a 4-year-old. Survival built instinct. We send word to Whitaker tonight, Wyatt said. Tell him what is coming. Tell him we need whatever he has got by morning. He handed the letter to Silas. And we send word to Coleman. Same thing. Whatever he can do. Whatever he can justify. Tomorrow is the day. Silas read the letter, handed it back. And if they cannot get here in time, then it is just us until they do. Imogen was already walking toward the house. She stopped at the door, turned back. I will write my statement tonight, she said. Everything signed and witnessed, even if I cannot stand in front of a judge tomorrow. Putting it on paper means it exists. She looked at Wyatt. A document with a signature is harder to disappear than a person. That is good thinking, Wyatt said. I worked for a man who taught me what he did not intend to, Imogen said, and went inside. Della was at the kitchen table when Wyatt came in, bent over a piece of paper with hard charcoal, working with the concentration of someone doing something important. She looked up when he came through the door, did her quick inventory, his face, his hands, the set of his shoulders, and went back to drawing. You look worried, she said without looking up. I am thinking. That is the same face. Tamsin, who had come back with Imogen and was at the counter, made a small sound that was not quite a laugh. Wyatt hung his coat, sat across from Della. She was drawing letters, he realized, copying them from a list Tamsin had written out for her, practicing each one with that focused intensity she brought to everything. The alphabet laid out in careful charcoal strokes, each letter a little steadier than the one before. Sterling is coming tomorrow, he said. Della's hand stopped. She looked up. He had thought about not telling her, had argued himself back and forth on the ride home, but she had heard partial conversations for 3 days. and filled in the rest herself, and she was going to know something was wrong the moment tomorrow arrived. The extra horses, the tension, the way adults moved when they were bracing for something. Better she heard it from him directly than pieced it together from what she was not supposed to see. Okay, she said. I want you to stay with Tamsin tomorrow in the back room, away from the windows. Whatever you hear, you stay there until I or Silas comes to get you. You understand? Yes, if something happens to me. If for some reason I cannot come, do not, Della said, Della, do not say that part. Her voice was very small and very firm. Just do not say it. He looked at her. She was looking back at him, and in those eyes he could see 4 years of being handed to strangers, 4 years of people who had said they would be there and had not been, and the particular terror of someone who had only just started to believe in something and was not ready to stop. All right, he said. I will not say it. She looked back down at her letters. Her hand was shaking slightly. She steadied it and kept writing. Thompson caught his eye across the room and tilted her head toward the door. He followed her out to the porch. She is going to hear everything tomorrow, Thompson said quietly. There is no back room far enough. I know. Wyatt. If Sterling comes with Coleman and legal papers and you do not have a judge's counter order, I know what happens. Then let me say it anyway, because someone should. She looked at him straight. You cannot physically prevent a legal taking. If Coleman is there with papers and Wallace signed them, and there is no higher authority present to override, Thompson, you will go to jail. They will take her anyway, and she will have watched you go to jail for her and still end up back with Sterling. He was quiet. I know, he said. So what is the actual plan? Whitaker is rallying the congregation. Imogen is writing her statement tonight. I have got word going to Coleman, and I have got a letter going to Judge Cooper in Cheyenne. Cooper cannot get here by tomorrow morning. No. So tomorrow morning what I have got is the congregation, Imogen's statement, Coleman's conscience, and whatever I am. He put his hands on the porch rail. I have been a U.S. Marshal, Thompson. I have stood in front of things that did not think anyone would stand. Sometimes standing is enough to change the math. Thompson was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I will be here tomorrow. You do not have to. I know I do not have to. She turned and went back inside. Make sure Silas gets some sleep, she said over her shoulder. He looks terrible. That night, Imogen sat at the kitchen table and wrote for 3 hours. She wrote everything. Wyatt and Silas witnessed it, signed their names at the bottom. Imogen folded the pages, sealed them, wrote Judge Thaddeus Cooper's name on the front. Silas would write it to the telegraph office in Red Creek before dawn. Not enough time for Cooper to respond by morning, but enough to put the truth in motion. Truth in motion was something. It was not nothing. Della came downstairs at 9 in her nightgown, holding the candle holder. She had taken to carrying it between rooms, herself lighting it from the kitchen flame. When she went upstairs, setting it on the nightstand beside her bed. She looked at Imogen across the table. Imogen looked at her. You are the one who knocked on the wall, Della said. Imogen went very still. 3 and 2, Della said. That was you. Imogen's breath came out slow. Yes, she said, that was me. Della looked at the candle in her hands. I used to knock back, she said, in case it was her, in case it was Pearl answering. But it was you. Yes. Imogen's voice was barely above a whisper. It was me. I am sorry I could not do more. Della was quiet for a moment. You are doing more now, she said. Then she went upstairs, and the 3 adults at the table sat without speaking for a moment, because there was nothing adequate to say after that. Wyatt took the watch that night himself, the chair outside Della's door, the revolver across his knee. He listened to the house settle around him, heard Imogen's movements in the kitchen finally go still. Around midnight, heard Silas snoring from down the hall, heard the wind come down off the mountains and do its work against the walls. He thought about the morning. He thought about Sterling, riding up that road with his men and his papers, and his certainty that the world arranged itself around what he wanted. He thought about how many of Whitaker's congregation would actually show up when it counted. He thought about which version of himself the sheriff was going to bring tomorrow. He reached into his coat and took out Della's 2 drawings. The house with the candle, the man on the horse with "come back" underneath. He had come back yesterday. He had come back the day before. He was going to keep coming back until there was no more coming back required, until the thing that needed holding was held, and the thing that needed breaking was broken. He put the drawings back in his pocket. Down the hall, through the closed door, he heard Stella shift in her sleep, murmur something, go quiet again. He stayed where he was. 10 armed men were going to ride up the road at first light, and the only thing standing between them and the small girl asleep on the other side of the door was Wyatt Calloway, an old hired hand, a doctor, a witness, and whatever kind of town Red Creek decided it wanted to be when the sun came up. The candle in the kitchen below burned on. The night went on, and somewhere out There, beyond the dark and the cold, Augustus Sterling was sleeping easy, dreaming perhaps of a small girl he intended to take back at dawn. He had no idea what was waiting for him. Morning came, the way mornings came in Wyoming winter, gray, then pale, then reluctantly bright, the sun doing the minimum required and nothing more. Wyatt heard Silas get up, heard the stove come to life, smelled coffee. He heard Imogene's door. Then Tamsin's voice downstairs. She had come before dawn as promised, without fanfare. He went to Della's door, knocked twice, soft. I am awake, she said. He opened the door. She was sitting up in bed, already dressed. The candle burned down to a stub beside her. She had been awake a while. He is coming today, she said. It was not a question. Yes. She looked at the candle stub. Will there be enough people? I do not know yet. She nodded, very serious. Then she slid off the bed and came to where he stood in the doorway and put her arms around him, quick and tight, and let go. Okay, she said. Let us go downstairs. They came down together, Wyatt's hand at her back. They found Silas and Tamsin and Imogen all at the kitchen table with coffee going. The morning coming through the windows, pale and cold and steady. And somewhere down the road, Wyatt knew Augustus Sterling was saddling his horse. They heard the horses at 8. Silas counted them from the kitchen window without being asked, quietly, accurately, without drama. 8 riders, he said, plus Sterling, plus Coleman. 10 men coming up the road. Wyatt set down his coffee cup. Imogen, he said. Back room. Stay there until I call you. I am not hiding. I am not asking you to hide. I am asking you to stay alive long enough to testify. He held her eyes. You are more useful in that room than on this porch. Do you understand? A pause. Then Imogen picked up her coffee, walked to the back room, closed the door. Not hiding, waiting. There was a difference, and she knew it. Tamsin put her hand on Della's shoulder. Della stood at the kitchen table very still, both hands flat on the wood the way she did when she was managing something large. Come with me, Tamsin said. I want to stay, Della said. I want to see. She looked at Tamsin with those dark eyes. I have been not seeing things for a long time. I want to see this. Tamsin looked at Wyatt. Wyatt looked at Della. Stay inside, he said. Stay back from the windows. You see anything that scares you, you go with Tamsin. No argument. Della nodded. Wyatt went out to the porch. Sterling rode. At the front, the same black horse he had ridden up to this porch days before. The same silver buttons on his coat catching the pale morning light. But the smile was different now. tighter, less certain that the world owed him anything. Coleman was beside him this time, not behind. The sheriff's position, meaning something, or meant to. 8 ranch hands spread out behind them. 3 of them had rifles already across their saddles, which was a statement, not a precaution. Sterling looked at Wyatt on the porch and smiled the way a man smiles when he thinks he has already won. "Calloway," he said, "last chance for this to go easy. It can go easy when you turn around and ride back the way you came." Sterling reached into his coat and produced a folded document. He held it up. "Territorial guardianship order signed by Judge Wallace 2 days ago. The child is my legal ward and you are in violation of a court order by keeping her." He tilted his head. "Sheriff Holloway is here to enforce it. This is the law. Calloway, not a threat. The law." Coleman sat his horse with his jaw set and his eyes not quite meeting Wyatt's. "Coleman," Wyatt said. Coleman looked at him. "Did you read that document before you rode out here?" "I did." "Did you read Imogen Bennett's statement? The one Silas brought to your office this morning before dawn?" Something shifted in Coleman's face. He had read it. Silas had made sure of that. "That statement," Wyatt said before Sterling could speak, "is signed and witnessed and on its way to Judge Thaddeus Cooper in Cheyenne. 8 months of testimony from a woman who lived in that house, children locked in a room, a girl who died of a fever that cost nothing to treat, a boy who ran and nobody looked for." He paused. "Cooper is honest, Coleman. You know that. You have been in his courtroom." Coleman was very still. "This is irrelevant," Sterling said. "Coleman, do your job." "There is also this," said a voice from the road. Everyone turned. Reverend Obadiah Whitaker rode up on a gray mare, and he was not alone. Behind him came wagons and horses and people on foot, men and women and older children from the town of Red Creek and the farms around it. 20 of them, maybe 25, coming up the road in a loose, determined group. Some carried rifles. Some carried nothing but themselves and the willingness to be counted. Mrs. Porter from the general store sat straight backed in a wagon seat. Ezra Grove, the blacksmith, a man the size of a small barn, walked alongside it. They spread out across the road and the edges of Wyatt's property and stopped, and the silence that followed was the loudest thing Wyatt had heard in a long time. Whitaker rode to the front, positioned himself between Sterling's men and the porch. "Augustus," he said. Sterling looked at him. The smile was gone now, replaced by something that was calculating its options very fast. "Obadiah," Sterling said carefully, I would encourage you to think about what you are doing. I have been thinking about it for 3 days, Whitaker said. And before that, I had been thinking about it for 6 months without the courage to act on it. I am acting on it now. He looked at Coleman. Sheriff, I have here signed statements from 4 families in my congregation who are prepared to testify that they witnessed evidence of mistreatment of children in Augustus Sterling's care. I have Imogen Bennett's statement, which details specific incidents of abuse, neglect, and the death of a child named Pearl who received no medical care despite being critically ill. He reached into his coat and produced papers. I am requesting that you suspend enforcement of Judge Wallace's order pending review by a judge without conflict of interest. Wallace's order is valid, Sterling said. His voice had gone flat. The pleasantness was gone entirely now, and what was underneath it was harder and colder and much more honest. Wallace's order may be valid, Whitaker said. It may also be reviewed and overturned. That is for a court to decide. He looked at Coleman directly. Coleman, you have been sheriff here for 11 years. You know these people. You know me. And I think you know what is true here. Coleman sat his horse for a long moment. One of Sterling's riders shifted, moved his rifle slightly. Silas, standing at the corner of the porch, raised his own rifle without hurry, without drama, and held it steady. Grove the blacksmith took a step forward from the crowd. 2 other men from the congregation did the same. The rider with the rifle went still. Coleman Sterling said. And now there was something in it that had not been there before. An edge, a demand, the sound of a man who was accustomed to being obeyed, reminding someone of that fact. Coleman looked at Sterling, then he looked at Wyatt, then he looked at the porch door, which had opened a few inches, and through which, if you were paying attention, you could see 2 small hands gripping the doorframe and a pair of dark eyes watching everything. Della. Not in the back room, not with Tamsin, standing at the door with her hands on the frame and her chin up, watching. Coleman looked at those hands for a moment. 4 years old. Small enough that both hands together barely spanned the doorframe. Bruised, faded, but visible even from where he sat his horse. He looked back at Sterling. I am suspending enforcement pending review, Coleman said. The words came out quiet and clear and final. Sterling turned to him fully. You do not have the authority. I have the authority to determine when enforcement of a civil order constitutes a threat to public safety, Coleman said, and I am determining that right now. He straightened in the saddle. Augustus, I have looked the other way on a lot of things over the years. Things I knew were not right because you were powerful and it was easier. That ends today. He looked at the riders behind Sterling. Put the rifles away, all of you. Nobody moved for a moment. Then Grove took another step forward, and the crowd behind him shifted with him, and one by one the rifles went down. Sterling's face had gone to something Wyatt had never seen on it before. Not anger. Something behind anger. Something that had been hidden for years under the smiling and the charitable donations and the front pew Sunday appearances. The face of a man who had never been told no by something that could not be bought. This is not over, Sterling said. It is over for today, Wyatt said. And every day after today, there will be more people who know what you are. More people willing to say it. You cannot buy all of them, cannot threaten all of them. He came down off the porch steps, stood in the cold yard, looked up at Sterling on his black horse. Judge Cooper will respond to that letter, Wyatt said. And when he does, Imogen Bennet will stand in a courtroom and tell 12 people exactly what she told me, and Della will be there, and people who have known this territory their whole lives will see her face. And then you tell me what 12 Wyoming citizens do with that. Sterling looked at him for a long moment. You have made an enemy, he said. You were already my enemy. I just stopped pretending otherwise. Sterling pulled his horse around. His riders followed. They rode out the way they had come, and the crowd from Red Creek parted to let them pass, and then closed back together again, and Wyatt stood in his yard and watched until the last of them crested the ridge and disappeared. Then he turned around. Della was standing on the porch, not in the doorway anymore, fully on the porch in the cold without her coat, both arms wrapped around herself, watching the place where Sterling had been with an expression that was walking through something too complicated to name. He walked to the porch steps and looked up at her. You were supposed to stay inside, he said. I know. We will talk about that later. Okay, he said. She looked at him. Is he gone? For now. He will come back. Through the law. Through the judge. Through Cooper's court. Yes. And we will be there. Yes. Wyatt came up the steps. With Imogen's testimony and Whitaker's statements, and Coleman's account, and 30 people from Red Creek who saw what they saw today. We will be there, Della. Every single time. She held his eyes for a moment. Then she stepped forward and put her arms around him, and he held her there on the porch in the cold. Over her head, he could see Whitaker dismounting and Thompson coming out the door, and Silas letting the rifle down from his shoulder, and Imogen standing in the doorway of the back room with her arms crossed and her eyes wet. Mrs. Porter climbed down from her wagon and walked over and said simply, "What does that child need?" And the Thompson started listing things, and Grove the blacksmith introduced himself to Silas as though they had not lived 20 miles from each other for a decade. And Whitaker came to shake Wyatt's hand with the expression of a man who had just caught up with himself after a long absence. All of it happened around Wyatt and Della, and Wyatt let it and held on. Judge Thaddeus Cooper's response came 6 days later. It was not a letter. It was Cooper himself riding into Red Creek on a Tuesday morning with two federal marshals and an expression that said he had read Imogen Bennett's statement twice and had not enjoyed either reading. He set up in the Red Creek Courthouse, a single-room building that served as town hall, courtroom, and community meeting space. He called for testimony, and he got it. Imogen Bennett sat in the witness chair for 3 hours. She spoke clearly, without drama, without exaggeration, and every word she said landed in the room like something solid and permanent. Cooper asked questions. Imogen answered them. She did not look at Sterling's lawyer. She looked at Cooper, and she told the truth. And the truth was more than enough. 4 congregation members testified. Coleman testified, and his account of what he had seen on Della's body and what he had witnessed at Wyatt's ranch cost him something to say. Wyatt could see that, but Coleman said it anyway, all of it, in the same plain voice he had used to enforce the law for 11 years, now turned toward something that actually deserved it. When Cooper asked to see Della, Wyatt brought her in. She sat in the chair across from the judge with her hands in her lap, very small in the large chair, and Cooper looked at her the way a grandfather looks at a child, carefully, gently, without the performance of authority. "Hello, Della," he said. "Hello. Do you know why you are here?" She thought about it. "So you can decide what happens to me," she said. "That is right. And I want to make sure I decide correctly, so I need to ask you one thing, and I need you to tell me the truth. Can you do that?" "Yes, sir." "Were you afraid at Mr. Sterling's house?" Della looked at her hands. She turned them over, looked at the palms, turned them back. The bruises were almost gone now, just the faintest shadow of yellow at her wrist. "Pearl was afraid," she said. "All the time she was afraid. She used to hold my hand in the dark and she would shake, and I would tell her it was okay. And it was not okay." She looked up at Cooper. "I do not want to go back to a place where I have to tell someone it is okay when it is not." Cooper looked at her for a long moment. "No," he said quietly, "you do not." He revoked Wallace's guardianship order before the end of the day. He recommended Wallace for review by the territorial court on the grounds of conflict of interest. He issued a warrant for Augustus Sterling on charges of criminal neglect and child endangerment, and Coleman served it before sundown. Sterling was taken to the county jail, and his men went with him or scattered, and the largest ranch in 3 counties sat empty and quiet for the first time in a decade. None of that was the moment Wyatt remembered afterward. The moment he remembered was the walk back to the wagon. Cooper had dismissed them, and Wyatt had taken Della's hand, and they had walked out of the courthouse into the afternoon, and she had been quiet the whole way down the steps, and then she had stopped on the bottom step and looked up at the sky for a moment, pale winter blue, the first clear day in a week, and she had taken a deep breath. "Wyatt," she said, "yeah, I want to learn to read. Not just letters, whole words, books." He looked at Atashi. "Thompson says there is a school," Della said, "in town. She says I could start in spring." "She is right, you could." Della looked at the sky for another moment. Then she looked at him. "I want to start in spring," she said. "I want to learn to read, and I want to plant something in the yard when the ground thaws, and I want to—" She stopped, started again. "I want to do things that take a long time, things you plan for." She met his eyes. "Because you have to believe you are going to be somewhere to plan for it." Wyatt's throat closed. "Yeah," he managed. "You do." "I believe that now," Della said. "That I am going to be somewhere." She said it plainly, the way she said all true things, without performance, without question, just the fact of it, set down like something she had decided on and was done deciding. She took his hand again, and they walked to the wagon. The adoption papers came in February, on a Thursday, delivered by a writer from Cheyenne, with Cooper's seal at the top and Wallace's name conspicuously absent from anything. Wyatt read them at the kitchen table, and then he read them again, and then he set them down, and sat with them for a while. Silas found him there 20 minutes later, and looked at the papers and looked at him, and said, "Well," in the tone of a man who already knew the answer. Wyatt called for Della. She came downstairs in her wool stockings, charcoal on her fingers. She had been practicing letters. She stopped when she saw his face. "What is it?" she said. He slid the papers across the table. She looked at them. She could not read all of it yet, but she could read some, enough. She read her name, which was getting easier every day. She read his name. She read the word that mattered most at the top in formal territorial script: adoption. She put one finger on that word and held it there. "Is this real?" she said. "It is real." She looked up at him. Her dark eyes were very bright. So I am yours. You are yours, Wyatt said. But yeah, also mine. Delilah looked back at the paper. She pressed her whole hand flat on it the way she pressed her hands on the table when she was managing something large. And she sat like that for a moment, feeling it under her palm. Real paper, real ink, real and permanent and not going away. Then she picked up her charcoal. I need to sign it, she said. You do. He watched her form her name letter by careful letter, more slowly and more deliberately than he had ever seen her do anything. Della. She paused, looked at him, then wrote the rest. Della Calloway. She set the charcoal down and looked at what she had written for a long moment. Pearl would have liked this, she said quietly. She always said we were going to have a real name someday, a family name. She touched the paper again. She was right. Silas made dinner that night. Enough for everyone. Tamsin came. Imogen, who had been staying in Red Creek at Mrs. Porter's boarding house while she figured out what came next. Whitaker came and brought two families from the congregation who had stood in Wyatt's yard that morning Sterling had ridden up. The table was full and loud and warm. After everyone had gone, after Silas had banked the fire, after the house had gone quiet, Wyatt found Della at the kitchen table with the candle. She had taken to sitting with it in the evenings. She did not always talk. Sometimes she just sat with the lighted, watching it. He had learned to leave her to it, to come when she wanted company, to stay back when she needed the quiet. Tonight she looked up when he came in. Sit with me, she said. He sat. They were quiet together for a while. The candle burned steady and low. Outside the wind did its work. The same wind that had been working at these walls for years. And the walls held, the same as they always had. I used to knock 3 and 2 on the wall, Della said finally, in the dark, waiting for someone to knock back. Nobody knocked back for a long time. She looked at the candle, and then one night there was a light in a window, and I walked toward it. She was quiet a moment. I think about that sometimes. What would have happened if you had not kept it burning? Wyatt looked at the candle, Eli's candle holder, the same one he had kept going for 6 years, for a boy who could not see it. The same flame, different candle, and now it belonged to both of them, to a boy who had been afraid of the dark, and a girl who had walked through it to find the light. I think about it too, he said. Della reached across the table and put her small hand over his large one. Do not stop keeping it burning, she said. Okay. Even when things are good, even when I am not scared anymore. She looked at him. Keep it burning anyway. So anybody else out there in the dark knows somebody is home. Wyatt turned his hand over and held hers. I will, he said. I promise. She nodded, satisfied, and looked back at the flame. The spring came late that year, the way spring always came late in Wyoming. The snow stayed in the high pasture into April. The creek behind the house ran fast and cold with melt for weeks, but it came. Della started school at the end of April. The little white schoolhouse at the edge of Red Creek, where Mrs. Calhoun had been teaching the children of 3 counties for 20 years. Wyatt rode her in on the first morning. She wore the blue dress Mrs. Porter had sent that first day, washed and mended now, and a new pair of leather boots that actually fit her, and she carried a small slate that Thompson had given her with her own hand. She did not look back at him when she walked into the schoolhouse. He sat on his horse at the edge of the road for a while after the door closed behind her, and he did not move. That is a hard thing, Silas said, riding up beside him, watching them go. It is. You all right, boss? Wyatt was quiet for a long moment. Yeah, he said, I am. He turned his horse and they rode back to the ranch together. In May, Della planted roses by the porch, pink ones from cuttings Mrs. Porter had given her because Mrs. Porter had a rose bush that her mother had brought from Pennsylvania 30 years ago. And she said roses were the kind of thing that should travel. Della dug the holes herself with a trowel that was almost too big for her hands. Wyatt watched her from the porch and did not offer to help because she had not asked, and because she was the kind of child who needed to do a thing herself before she would believe it was hers. The roses bloomed in late June, pink and small and stubborn. Imogene Bennett opened a small bakery in Red Creek that summer. Mrs. Porter rented her a room above the general store and helped her get started. By the fall, she had 3 regular customers and a sign in the window that said Bennett's Bakery in careful gold paint. She came out to the ranch every Sunday for dinner. Della called her Jenny. Imogen cried the first time she called her that and never afterward because Della would not have wanted her to. Sheriff Coleman Holloway lost his next election narrowly. Sterling money still moved in the territory even from inside a federal prison. But Coleman did not seem to mind. He took a job as a deputy under the new federal marshal who was assigned to clean up the western counties. He stopped drinking that summer. Wyatt did not ask him about it. Coleman did not bring it up. Reverend Obadiah Whittaker preached every Sunday in the same little white church. The east wing, which Sterling had built, was renamed in the spring. They called it the Pearl Wing. Nobody at the dedication needed it explained. The congregation grew that year. People came from farther out. Some of them brought their own quiet wounds. Whitaker preached on them gently the way a man tends to a fire he has decided not to let go out. Augustus Sterling was tried in Cheyenne in May. Imogen testified. Della did not have to. Cooper had decided that her statement at the first hearing was sufficient and that no 4-year old should have to stand in a federal courtroom twice. Sterling was convicted on 6 counts. He was sentenced to 20 years. He served 11 of them before he died of a stroke in a cell in 1898. A small notice ran in the Cheyenne paper. Nobody from Red Creek went to the funeral. The boy Wesley was found in the end. 2 years after Della came to the door, a Homestead family 40 miles south of Rollins had taken him in the spring after he ran. They had not known where he came from. They had given him their last name. He was 9 years old when Wyatt finally tracked him down, and he was healthy and learning to read and afraid of nothing in particular, and Wyatt did not bring him back. He just looked at him for a long time through the kitchen window of the homestead and saw that the boy was where he needed to be. And he rode home to tell Della that Wesley was alive. Della cried for an hour, and then she made Wyatt promise to take her to meet him someday. He took her. The next summer, they sat in a kitchen together, 2 children who had once knocked on opposite walls of the same locked room, and they did not say much. They did not need to. Thompson Whitfield delivered Della's first cousin in the fall of 1888 when Wyatt's sister came out from Indiana to visit and ended up staying for the winter and then for good. Thompson also taught Della how to bandage a horse's leg, how to set a chicken bone, and how to tell a man his time had come without making him feel ashamed. Thompson never married. She did not seem to mind. She and Della became, in the slow, growing way of these things, something like family that did not need a name. Silas Pritchard lived another 14 years. He died in his sleep at the age of 74 in the small room of the kitchen that had been Della's first proper bedroom. Della was 18. She was the one who found him. He had a small smile on his face, and his hand was resting on a book Della had given him for Christmas, and she sat with him for a long time before she went to find Wyatt. They buried Silas on the ranch, in the small fence ground at the edge of the property where Wyatt had buried Eli's old saddle the year after the funeral because he had not been able to bury Eli there, but had wanted some piece of the boy on this land. Margaret had a stone in town. Eli had a stone in town. Silas had a stone here. The candle Della carried out that day stayed lit through the entire service. The wind tried, and the candle held. Wyatt Calloway lived to be 79. He saw Della graduate from the school in Red Creek. He saw her go to the women's college in Laramie, the second class of women admitted. He saw her come home and teach in the same small white schoolhouse where she had learned her letters. He saw her marry a young veterinarian named James Talbot in the church Reverend Whitaker had once stood in. He walked her down the aisle. He did not cry, but only because he had decided beforehand that he was not going to, and he was a stubborn man. He saw his first grandchild, a girl named Margaret Pearl Talbot, born in 1908. He held her in the same kitchen where he had held a 4-year-old runaway 21 years before. The candle was still on the table. Della had taken it home with her when she married, and brought it back when the baby was born, and lit it for the first night of her daughter's life. He saw a second grandchild, a boy named Eli James, in 1911. He died in the spring of 1925 in the same kitchen, in the chair he had always sat in. Della was holding his hand. She was 42 years old, by then the same age Tamsin had been on the night she had ridden through the snow to look at a small girl's bruises. Delilah had her own children grown. She had her own quiet life. She had in every way that mattered become the kind of woman who showed up. He died with the candle burning on the table in front of him. His last words, the way Della told it later, were spoken so quietly that she had to lean down to hear them. The candle stays lit, he said. She nodded against the back of his hand. I will keep it burning, she said. He closed his eyes, and he did not open them again. Della Calloway Talbot kept that candle going every night of her life. She lived to be 87 years old. She never let the flame go out, not in storms, not in moves, not when her husband died, not when her son went to fight in France, not when her daughter died of cancer in 1962. She kept it burning. And when her own time came, she taught her granddaughter how to keep it. The candle is still lit somewhere in a kitchen in Wyoming, on a table that has belonged to 4 generations of Callaways and Talbots, and the people they have loved. Some lights, once kindled by the right hand, do not go out. Some doors, once opened, never quite close. And somewhere, for every small hand still reaching up in the dark against everything it has been taught, hoping against hope that someone will reach back. There is a window with a light in it, and a man at the table inside who has decided that keeping the flame alive is the truest thing he will ever do. The wind will try, the walls will hold, and the candle stays lit.